千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. This chapter can be distilled into 3 primary points. So you've already seen them. This is just to reiterate with some examples. Point number 1, the military is a tool of misfortune. So by now, that should be a very familiar phrase. And keep in mind, the military is not just, the ancient armies of the warring states. No. It's metaphoric. It's a metaphor for weapons, the use of force, the means of violence. So all of these apply to you in the here and now. So Tao cultivators regard the military, weapons, the use of force, the means of violence as a tool of misfortune, and that is why Tao cultivators do everything possible to resolve conflict peacefully. I put an underline here. I underline resolve conflict peacefully because I want to come back to this and provide a few examples. When using this tool out of necessity, point number 2, it must be done correctly. It must be done in the proper way, in the Tao way, which means 2 points, as you can see here, that calmness and detachment should be above all, that you should be using force with the recognition from calmness that you're doing damage. So that's still better than using force out of rage or out of a desire for vengeance. And the other requirement from the Tao is that you may never glorify the violence. So I think, as many decades ago, as a much younger guy growing up, I definitely had the tendency, as many younger guys do, to glorify violence. So I need to recognize that. I need to let go of it. It's behind me. It's in the past. So myself today must proceed into the future with the recognition that there is no possible true glory in violence. And then point number 3, understand the true nature of victory. In the last part of this chapter, it says that victory should be mourned like a funeral. So do we really understand that victory means people have suffered and died? Winning means the loss of many lives that calls for funeral and mourning. When we say it like that, it makes all the sense in the world. Well, of course, even if you win, many casualties, what was the price that you had to pay? Perhaps you felt that the price needed to be paid to further peace, to maintain and protect peace. Fine. But that still doesn't mean that we can overlook those who have given up their lives. And I also want to challenge everyone to go even deeper and go beyond the conventional concept of winning and losing. What does it mean to win? What does it mean to lose? Is winning really winning? Is losing really losing? Most people have a flat 2-dimensional view of that. My challenge in a moment is to get everyone to think deeper into these ideas. So let me get into details on the first one. And here I want to talk about conflict resolution. The Tao of conflict resolution. there are skills and methods that you can learn to resolve conflicts in your life. There are even people, consultants, trainers who specialize in conflict resolution, because you and I know that conflicts are just a part of life, a natural part of life. It's always going to happen. It's going to happen multiple times. So to be able to resolve conflict is a great gift that we can give to ourselves. So here, I have some suggestions for everyone on the skills that we can learn to resolve conflicts. So point number one, reduce the distortion often present in human communication. I have seen this in my own life. I have seen that miraculous things happen when I communicate directly and accurately to the other party. You clear up misconceptions that led to the conflict in the first place. And you can do that in a peaceful way. So the sub-bullet that I have there is, remember the game of telephone. I'm a little surprised to hear this, this term, Chinese whispers. Then, I was not familiar with the term Chinese whispers, but looking deeper into it, I learned that what I call the game of telephone is actually called Chinese whispers in many parts of the world. Does anyone know how these games work? What people do? This is a very common game, by the way. If you know what the game is, please feel free to type it in. And let me explain. So ever since I was little, I've seen this game being played. It's always a lot of fun. When you have people at a party, you line them up, and then in the game of telephone or Chinese whispers, you write something down and you whisper that something to the first person in line, and they have to then pass it on to the next person and the next and the next and the next and the next, which is why they call it Chinese whispers. So I'm learning that in the UK, it's called Chinese whispers. In the Commonwealth, in the British Commonwealth, it's called Chinese whispers. But in North America, it's called the game of telephone. So what always happens when you get to the end of the line is that the last person in line, has a dramatically different message than the one that you started out with. So this is what I mean by the distortion often present in human communications. So let me talk about how this is related to conflict resolution. There are people out there who specialize in conflict resolution. They are experts in helping to resolve what seem like intractable conflicts. So there's a firm by the name of Mediation Agency. The primary consultants, Dr. Frank Hanna, Nancy Peterson, travel all over the world helping to resolve conflicts. So they talk about this one case that they worked on in a particular city that shall remain unnamed. That city was actually paralyzed in terms of the court system for 5.5 months. There was a dispute, there was a conflict, contention among the employees of the city courts and the management of the city courts. So when they got to the city, they asked what the problem was. So both sides were firmly entrenched. It was the management of the courts against the workers, the employees of the courts. And at the center of the conflict was the requirements from management that the employees need to come into work on Saturdays. And this was because there was a huge backlog of cases to be heard in the courts. So in order to deal with that backlog, to clear it out, they need to get everybody to work more, including Saturdays and Sundays. So they investigated further, and what the management told them was that The workers were absolutely unwilling and stonewalling this attempt to clear out the backlog. And the workers, for their part, said that the management was demanding and not listening to anything they had to say, and therefore they have decided to go on strike. So as they went deeper into it, they discovered that there was one particular clerk who was at the beginning of this entire conflict. This clerk, this lady, was a longtime employee of the city courts and was known as a very hard worker. Now, at the heart of the issue was that she didn't drive. So every day going into work, she relied on fellow employees at the city courts to give her a ride. So it was either that or take the public transportation, the bus, which for her would be 2.5 hours one way. So when the requirements came in from the management that people had to report in for 3 hours of work on Saturdays to hear one case, this lady, this clerk, was thinking to herself that, well, on a Saturday, she can't get a ride from her fellow employee because that particular employee did not work for the city, but not for the courts, and therefore doesn't have to report to work on Saturday. So it meant that this lady would have to take public transportation. She calculated and found that, well, for her, 2.5 hours one way meant that on a Saturday, 5 hours would be gone, wasted on transportation for 3 hours of work at the courts. So she felt that she couldn't comply. She couldn't do it. It was physically not possible. It wasn't practical for her to do it. And when this got back to the management, it was through the game of telephone. So she said, I can't do it. What they heard by the time the message got to them was, I won't do it. So couldn't became wouldn't. So the management was not pleased about this, to say the least. And the reaction from management was, oh yeah? Well, I can make you come in. That was the beginning of the conflict. By clearing up that distortion and letting both sides know what the situation actually was, the 5.5 months of paralysis in the city courts was resolved in a week. So that's one way to resolve conflicts peacefully, is by reducing the distortion present in human communication. Let's look at another strategy that we can also potentially use in daily life. Be inclusive of different perspectives. So when we have disagreements that lead to conflicts, we naturally all think that our perspective is the correct one. When you want to resolve perspectives that are in conflict with one another, look for the possibility of incorporating all perspectives. This is because people naturally wish to be part of the solution. So for this one, I go to an author and consultant who likes to tell a story about 3 little girls that she knows. These little girls are 8 years old, from different families. They grew up together. They were good friends. They played together. But then one day, they told their parents that they were fighting with one another. This was alarming to all the parents. Why are you little girls fighting? They wanted to know. So they looked into the matter. It turned out that the little girls, as they were playing and chatting, got into a conversation topic, and the topic was, where do people come from? So all three little girls had a different answer. One little girl came from a religious family. She said, God created people. Another little girl came from a family where one parent was a scientist and the other one was an educator. She said, no, people evolved from apes. The third little girl had a completely different idea. She said, no, there's a volcano and people pop out of it. So at first, the adults assumed that she was joking, the third little girl. But then they discovered she was quite serious, and she was puzzled why the adults would not take her concept seriously. Anyhow, the little girls argued with one another about who was right. So they looked into this. They spoke with the parents. The parents spoke with one another. The religious parents said, well, that's what we teach our little girl. Well, we're not going to teach her any differently. God created all human beings. And the educator and the scientist also said, well, we're going to teach our child evolution. There's no other way for us. Now, she has the erroneous concept that humans came from apes, but eventually she'll figure out that in evolution, humans and apes and monkeys all came from an earlier, more primitive form of hominids, etc. The third set of parents said, well, we have no idea why she thinks humans pop out of volcanoes, but the parent said, when I was little, I had all kinds of crazy ideas. I had imaginary friends. I believed Santa Claus was real. As I grew older, I grew out of them. So I don't see that as a big problem. So the parents could not come to a resolution on their own, but the little girls did on their own. So the parents went to the little girls and said, how did you guys resolve your difference? Did you decide to go with one idea and discard the other two? The little girl said, no, we figured out where people actually come from. So the parents, curious, said, what? Really? Where? Tell us. So all three little girls said to their parents, you see, God created a giant volcano. So apes popped out of this volcano, and then they evolved into people. So we are all correct. So now the parents were amazed at this reconciliation and resolution of a conflict. Of course, they knew that these little girls, as they grew older, would learn differently, would figure out, in their own way, the origin of humanity. But at the moment, it was much, much more important for them to reestablish peace and harmony, the conflict resolution that was inclusive of all their different perspectives. So as you go about your life, when you see conflicts that arise out of different perspectives, I want to encourage you to also look for the possibility that the different perspectives can be incorporated. No one needs to be left out. If you open your eyes to that possibility, perhaps you will be able to see it. Lastly, creative problem solving. Here, the subtitle, the sub-bullet point says, be the catalyst for peace. And for this one, I want to share another story with you. A story that I call Catalyst for Peace. And there's a specific reason why I call it that name. So listen to this story. Once upon a time, in the outskirts of ancient China, there lived a nomadic tribe that made their living in the great desert. For them, camels were the primary means of transportation. and therefore they were highly valued. It was always a big deal when an elder tribesman passes away and passes on his camels, the camels that he owns, which are his primary assets, to his children. So the passing, the inheritance of the camels was a big deal to the tribe. And the written will of the deceased was sacred to them. It had to be followed to the letter. So one day, one of the elders passed away. So the tribe gathered to read his will. He had three sons, and his will was simple. So he had the oldest son, the second son, and the youngest son. His will said, the oldest son, who had contributed the most in the family business, should inherit half of his camels. The second son, who had also done much, should inherit 1/3 of the camels. The youngest son, who was still growing and hadn't done much, should inherit 1/9 of the camels. So this will was quite clear, but there was one problem. The old man owned 17 camels. How was the oldest son supposed to get half of 17 camels? How was the second son supposed to get 1/3 of 17? And the youngest son, 1/9 of 17. None of it worked. So things quickly descended into chaos and dispute. The tribal chief said that the old man wrote the will years ago when he had only 9 camels. So he really meant for the youngest son to have 1 camel, 1/9 of 9 camels, and the rest of the camels could be split between the 2 older sons, 4 each. The eldest son objected and said it was clear in the will that his father intended for him to have more than the second son. So an even split would not be honoring his father's intention. No one could agree to anything. And it was at this moment, during this time, that a wise man came across the tribe in his journey through the desert. He rested and refreshed himself and was about to resume his journey when he heard the commotion, the contentious noise of arguments increasing in volume. He went toward the noise and he saw that things were getting heated. People were getting red in the face. He asked what was going on, and the people at the tribe explained the situation to him. So the wise man thought about it and said, perhaps I can help. I rode in here on my camel, so how about if I give my camel to the estate of the elder who passed away, so he owns 18 camels, not 17. If everyone can agree to that, then we can look at his will again. Half of 18 for the eldest son means he should get 9 camels. 1/3 of 18 for the second son means he should get 6 camels. 1/9 of 18 for the youngest son means he should get 2 camels. We have now honored the father's intention and follow his will to the letter. After passing down the camels in this manner, 9, 6, and 2, we find that we have 1 camel left, because 9, 6, and 2 add up to 17. As luck would have it, it's the camel that I gave to the estates just a moment ago. Since my contribution resolved this conflict peacefully, the estate in gratitude will give that camel back to me as a gesture of appreciation. So everyone was satisfied with this resolution and looked upon the wise man with gratitude as he rode away from the tribe, bidding his farewell. This is actually a story that's taught in professional courses of conflict resolution. It is sometimes called the 18th camel. So in the vernacular of conflict resolution, the 18th camel becomes the catalyst. It's the peacemaker. It comes into the situation like a chemical catalyst initiating a reaction toward peace. And when that reaction has taken place, the catalyst dissolves or goes away, like the wise man resuming his journey. So when it comes to the Tao of conflict resolution, I want to encourage everyone to think in terms of creativity and flexibility, that you may think of the 18th camel, the catalyst for peace, as finding common ground. Introduce common ground to the parties in contention. You may think of it as triangulation. That is, you don't want to adopt one party's solution or the other, but then there's another solution that doesn't match either one that everyone can be happy with. So those are 3 possible strategies for conflict resolution. And the other thing that I underlined was the conventional understanding about winning and losing. So you have already seen in this chapter that what most people celebrate as victory, as a triumph from the Tao perspective, is actually not worthy of celebration because of all the damage that's been done. So the bottom line is that Tao cultivators have to think deeper about the true cost of victory. So with unconventional view of the Tao, you also want to take a look at how people just want to win. For instance, they want to be right in an argument, and they want to be right in order to win, and therefore they want to be right at any cost. Somehow, that becomes the most important thing. You can tell this is the reason why Tao cultivators avoid debates. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.